wonder whether this whole betting story has really scandalised people as much as the media, like this media, to be fair, might be suggesting. Is it a political story that you found yourself shrugging your shoulders at? It's not a surprise, you think, that these people had a flutter. It's not corruption on any kind of endemic or state level. It's a bad misjudgment, but it's not boiling your blood. In the coverage we've done of this story, a lot of you have said, oh, come on, Tom, this doesn't matter that much. This is mountain out of a molehill, mate. Look at the real scandals, the real issues, the real quiz. So I saw this story and I thought of you. About 1.4 billion quid's worth of personal protective equipment has been destroyed or written off in what is understood to be the most wasteful government deal of the pandemic. These are figures obtained by the BBC, reveal that at least 1.57 billion items of PPE provided by the NHS supplier Full Support Healthcare will never be used despite being manufactured to the proper standard. The Department for Health and Social Care, responsible, of course, for purchasing and delivering COVID PPE, have taken umbrage at the figure. They say, we do not recognise the 1.4 billion figure quoted. Our position on PPE stock is set out in the department's annual accounts as audited by the National Audit Office. Full Support Healthcare got a 1.78 billion quid deal. Just say that again. A 1.78 billion pound deal in April 2020 to deliver face masks and respirators and eye protections and aprons. It was the largest COVID PPE order from a single supplier. It accounted for 13%, just that one order, 13% of the government's total spend. Before the pandemic, this is a company based in Northamptonshire, which was already a specialist manufacturer of PPE, so it's not like some bloke in a pub, had 25 employees and annual profits of 800 grand. Now, there's nothing to suggest the company have done anything wrong here. They fulfilled the order, they provided what they were paid to provide, and all of it was usable. It was manufactured to the standard that was required. And yet, and here's the key part of it, I think, in the ordering of all that PPE from one company, the owners of which had bought a place in the Bahamas and a yacht, but, good luck to them, with all that PPE and all that demand, do you know how much of it actually reached the NHS? Of the 2 billion items received, just 232 million reached the NHS. And you do the maths on that.
2 + 2 is 4, -1, that's 3, quick maths.
You do the maths on that, and it's just 11% of the ordered kit making it to its destination. Did the NHS need more kit? Was it well stocked enough not to require it? Was ordering 2 billion items actually the right thing to do at the time because the government didn't know whether they would be able to get their hands on more later down the line? In the same way that people are willing to excuse some of the betting stuff. Is this also to some extent excusable? That 1.4 billion quid has in effect gone up in smoke. Is that more or less of an affront to you than this gambling story? Is this something you can't excuse the government for, the financial waste that went on? Is it something that actually you might have in the back of your mind when you vote? Because what I heard loud and clear from some of you the other day is that the COVID waste really matters to you. And if it does matter to you, the question I have for you is what makes you think any political party would do any better when it comes to the issue of government waste? It might, hopefully, for God's sake, it's not going to be another pandemic that we have to spend a lot of money on. But Labour says it would reform procurement, but you will know if you work in different parts of the state, in education, in social care, in the NHS, that wasting of money is endemic. It's like a national pastime to pay over the odds for equipment or to buy the wrong kit or for the process to take too long. And I don't see that being sorted anytime soon. So a couple of things. If this gargantuan waste of money, this largesse makes your blood boil, who do you think is better placed to stop government waste and misspending? And from your own experience of working in government, the state somewhere, again, hospitals, schools, you name it, any part of it, do you see that waste and how it would be possible to stop it? Bearing in mind, lots of talk is about economic growth. There are lots of public sector cuts in theory to come down the line. There are parts of the state that are crying out for more money. And 1.4 billion quid's worth of PPE has apparently just gone up in smoke. And that's not the worst of it when it comes to government overspend, some of which I'll run you through a bit later. 03456060973 is the number. 4:09. Peter Smith is former government procurement advisor and now a consultant, visiting lecturer and author. Thank you for coming on the programme, Mr. Smith. To what extent do you think this destruction of the PPE is justifiable?
Well, there's not much else you can do, quite honestly, because it does go out of date. It has a best before date, like foodstuffs and other things. And particularly if it hasn't been stored properly, if it's been sitting outside in storage containers, piled up in ports and railway yards, it probably hasn't been stored particularly well anyway. So it comes to the point where it can't be used and it has to be disposed of. And just to be clear, the 1.4 billion is only from that one contract.
Yep.
The amount that's probably going to be or has been destroyed, burnt, whatever, is almost certainly at least twice that much. It's
Wow.
probably over 3 billion.
Wow. And again, do you think that is in some sense justifiable? Now it obviously feels impossible, but at the time, of course, there was such a rush on getting this PPE. No one knew where they could get it from. No one knew how long it was going to last for. So we overspent by 3 billion quid. It's all gone up in smoke. That's just what we had to do, might be the argument.
I think the whole story is explicable. There's a few aspects of it that people may or may not choose to forgive. But I think you can explain it by the situation we were in early 2020, when demand for PPE went up sort of 5 or 10-fold overnight. So rather than buyers having the choice of who they bought from and sellers having to sell, it was like the buyers were in the seller's position, desperately trying to find stock. So a lot of it is explicable. The first thing that, to my mind, went wrong was the first serious forecast that was produced in sort of March, April 2020 of what was going to be needed. And this was at a time when the buyers were panicking because every hospital was on the phone to them saying, we're running out of PPE. A forecast was produced that in retrospect was probably about 100% out. So the forecast talked about needing 30 billion plus items of PPE. And in retrospect, easy to look back now, it probably could have been half that much.
So do you think
was
that
the first big problem.
the people who are, as we speak, queuing up to get on the radio to vent their sporren at this extraordinary waste of money, do you think that their anger could be eased by saying, look, that was then, it was crazy, there's going to be some waste, this is just part of it?
Well, I'd like to know, the NAO has done a great job of reporting on this, but the bit about how that forecast was so far out, I haven't seen any real explanation for that. So if we're going to avoid this next time, it would be good to know how that happened. And then we got into the phase of just panic buying, where the buyers got that forecast and said, oh my God, we've got to go out and find the stuff.
Now that COVID was, fingers crossed, we hope, a once-in-a-lifetime event for which we were clearly very underprepared. Broadly, though, government wastes extraordinary sums of money and has done for generations, possibly forever. Why is that? How is that? And what should be done to stop it, Peter?
Oh, how long have you got? I'm not trying to plug my book, but I've written a book called Bad Buying, How Organisations Waste Billions of Pounds. And there's quite a lot of government stories in there.
Give us a story from the book that you think tells the story best.
HS2 is a pretty good one. There's various MOD stories. There's the ongoing Ajax armoured cars, where we've spent billions and still basically hardly have any vehicles. That's an interesting example because it does highlight a few different points. The internal political and organisational battles in MOD between different parts of the MOD, all trying to get funding, not really interested in maybe getting best value for money. It's more about we want our tanks rather than the Navy having more frigates. And then every general looks at the specifications for the new tank and says, no, I don't want that. I want bigger guns and more space, and it should go this fast. And you end up designing a camel rather than a horse or whatever the analogy is. There are capability issues that has been addressed in part in recent years, but the procurement capability is still pretty thin. There's a feeling that you can bring in people from consultancies that will sort it all out. Actually, quite a lot of the people involved in the panic buying who didn't do a great job, frankly, were consultants. They weren't civil servants, so we can't purely blame the civil servants. And I think there is always a thing in the public sector. My friends in the civil service will hate me for saying this. It's not the same as it being your money, my money, and it's not the same as in the private sector. You know, when I worked for Mars Confectionery or NatWest, what we were spending was very much linked to our bottom line and profit and probably our bonuses. And you know, we didn't want to spend more money than we needed to. But actually in the public sector, a lot of your status and even the way your job is evaluated and what level it's at is based on how big your budget is. And if you don't spend all your budget this year, they'll take it off you for next year.
I remember that in what used to be the Department for International Development when I worked in politics. When it came to the end of the spending period, they just had to shovel money out the door. It didn't matter. In a sense, it didn't matter who it went to. They just had to spend it because they couldn't have an underspend because they'd lose it.
Well, I've been a consultant as well as being a senior civil servant. And we always knew come March, that was a great time for getting new contracts because the budget year finished end of March. So it was, oh my goodness, I've got a couple of $100,000 left in my budget. Let's find a consulting project that might take a year, but we can spend all that money now. So there are some endemic issues there.
So it sounds like in a way it's a culture issue, doesn't it? It's not my money. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Governments spend hundreds of billions of pounds. So what's £100,000 really worth?
Yeah, and I do think, I'm not making this political, but I do think corruption has increased in the last few years.
In what sense?
I was talking to someone about this other day. There was not a huge story, but a story this week about a contract in the NHS actually going to a consulting firm that was owned by the friend of a minister. And what appears to have come out is the civil servants, people in the NHS, in procurement, all advised that this wasn't very sensible to award this firm the contract without any competition. And the minister just basically said, make it happen. Now, when I worked in the civil service quite a few years ago, I really don't think that would have happened if we'd advised a minister that this wasn't going to look good in private eye. And he could be accused of nepotism and even corruption. I think 99 times out of 100, the minister would have backed off. And the last few years, perhaps partly because pandemic just threw everything up in the air, I've seen more examples where the minister will overrule the process, and then the civil servants see that, and we've seen some pretty dodgy contracts and money not coming from minister level, but the senior civil servants making decisions that I would query. So we've got to be very careful we don't become like countries I won't mention, but countries in the world where public sector procurement is absolutely rife with corruption and fraud.
Very good to talk to you. Really appreciate that background. Peter Smith, former government procurement advisor, now a consultant, visiting lecturer and author. 0345 6060 973. If this makes your blood boil rather more than the Gamblegate, if you are happy to have called up the other day to say, come on, get to the real issue, look at the PPE waste. Well, here's a great example of it. What's to be done about it?